Brother Ron, and welcome to We All Be News Radio and TV, the news-free Dixie for the 21st century.
It's an honor to have you back on, Brother Rodnell Collins. You are the son of the legendary Ella Collins, the elder sister sibling of Brother Malcolm X. And it's just so timely to talk to you right now about the state of affairs, about your uncle who would have been 95 years young this year in 2020. And also you've been gone from the planet in the physical form for 55 years, but his spirit is very much alive right now. So how you doing this morning?
Yes, sir. I'm doing fine, and you can say hello to my son, Arjun Collins, who's the curator of the Malcolm X Ella Collins House in Boston. You can just briefly speak with him and say hello and introduce yourself to him.
Hey, greetings, good brother. How you doing today?
Good, brother. How's everything?
I'm great, man. You sound like your dad, man. I sound like Malcolm X to me sometimes. I think I'm talking to Malcolm X.
Yes, I get that a lot, but I'll let you speak to the original.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank y'all for doing this work, though. We need this legacy to be more available and accessible to our young people right now, because they really need the guidance and inspiration.
Of course. I mean, your radio and your station seems to be at the forefront of all that, so I'm wishing you the best.
Thank you. I received that, bro. I appreciate that so much.
Yes, sir.
All right, Brother Hurd. You're back, as I should say, with the original.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you know
he
what,
has
man?
some work to do. He's about to go and do some work on the site. So he I'm putting the young man to work, and we have to pass. We won't be here forever, so he is the curator in charge of the Malcolm X Ella Collins House here in Roxbury, which is a city, state, and national landmark now being recognized by the U.S. Department of Interior, as is the property in Omaha, Nebraska, the birth site of Malcolm X, El-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz. That's a national U.S. Department of Interior and Park Service historic site.
That's excellent work, man. I'm glad that the legacy is living, is accessible to the people, and hopefully for generations to come. So, I mean, Malcolm, like I said, it's such timely right now. His timeliness, the timelessness of Malcolm, considering what's going on in the world of state affairs. And I just want your take on, what is your take on what's going on, what's happening right now with the George Floyd protests and other things?
Well, of course, any of our people, African and Native American people who have been terrorized, raped, and murdered, and a lot of our folks like to say disenfranchised. Disenfranchisement is should not be a priority for us when we've been terrorized and raped and murdered for 500 years, and there are people who are physically sick and disabled, mentally, physically, and their focus, like I spoke to you earlier, my mother said that their focus is on material gain, that dollar, and our focus should be on our minds and our soul, and getting that correct first. And as Malcolm said, you've lost your mind. You've left your mind in Africa. And so many of our people, in his own words, are mindless of their action and don't know what they're doing. They believe that being black is a skin color. And that's what they are primarily focusing on. If you ask them, what does it mean to be black, be African, black in America, 99.9% of them can't tell you. They cannot tell you. I know in a lot of schools across America, and the way the media goes, a lot of our young people think Martin Luther King wrote the Civil Rights Bill. Martin Luther King didn't have a thing to do with the Civil Rights Bill as far as in writing it. The person who was responsible for that, significantly so, was Reverend Congressman Adam Clayton Powell. who was the chair under the House in Congress for the Health, Education, and Welfare Department, a significant person long before Malcolm X, long before Dr. King, long before Medgar Evers. But you hear nothing about that man who is significant to much of what we're enjoying today. But you don't hear our children or young people talking about Reverend Congressman Adam Clayton Powell, who African Americans and European Americans are enjoying the fruits of his labor. But it had to take two white men, two presidents, to recognize Congressman Powell for his work, President Kennedy and President Johnson. But so that reflects on where we are today. Our people, and as Malcolm said when he addressed those in Selma, Alabama, the SNCC students, that he was sorry for he himself not doing enough, sorry for our ancestors not doing enough after more than 150 years or 500 years in this country and still suffering. The evidence is that just visit the Smithsonian, the National African American Museum in Washington, the Smithsonian, and see some of that history from 1492. It's there. But they prefer to go out in the streets and talk and march and hope and dream and pray. And there's nothing wrong with that. But there's no blood, sweat, and tears. Malcolm talked about revolution. That means to overturn. To overturn. They talk about. That's all they're doing. They're talking about something. But what are they doing in their home, in their community, and with others in the nation and around the country? But marching. You know, Malcolm wouldn't approve. My mother wouldn't approve. She, in her own words. She's on YouTube. We don't have to. We were born free. Freedom is a state of mind, first of all, and your condition. You know, there was a song back in the day, brother. I don't know if you know about it, but I can't remember the singer. They said, "Oh, what a condition my condition is in." All right? And our condition is such that, as Malcolm said, we've lost our mind. And so a lot of young people out here today, it's not my opinion. It's what Malcolm, my mother, my father, and those in our family that had struggled for so long, and the others, Dr. King, had spoke about. Dr. King, of course, would not approve of this. Breaking a window at Wells Fargo, jumping on somebody's car. What does that accomplish? That same amount of time and energy you were doing, you could be teaching a child in the community, volunteering in community, teaching in our community. It's not about European Americans joining us and Black Lives Matter. Black lives should matter to them. We don't have to raise any signs. Let them do all the sign raising. I can tell you from traveling around the nation, I see more Black Matter signs in white communities at their churches, in their community town halls, as it should be. And they need to get amongst themselves and get their own act together. And we need, as Malcolm said, we need to be amongst ourselves and stop the violence on each other, the murder, the abandoning our children, having babies that we're not taking care of. That's our future. How are you marching for the future if you're being destructive? As I said to you earlier, be aware of the destroyer. That's what my mother said. Be aware of those who destroy and who are not constructive. Be a builder. Be a builder, not a destroyer of anything. European Americans and Europeans have been, their history speak nothing but destruction. That's what they have been about, and they're still about. There are those who are trying to change that, and that's what Malcolm talked about. We should not be law-abiding, go about our business and do what we have to do in our community, amongst ourselves, getting our minds together, first and foremost. this other stuff that they're doing, Malcolm, my mother, and I do not support that type of action. They're calling it violence when, much as Malcolm said then, the violence that happened when blacks or Native Americans would demonstrate in some sort in America, the violence was coming from who? Not from us. Mm-hmm. The violence didn't come from Dr. King when he was marching and the others that marched with him. The violence was not coming from us. As it was then, it was coming from European Americans who swore that they were Americans. And the same thing is happening today. They plant people within our organizations, within our struggles. Malcolm said himself, if we have a problem with each other and we're doing harm to each other, let's get in the back room and duke it out and solve our own problems in our community. Let the Europeans, Americans, go in their community, in America, in Europe, in Africa, Asia, South America, and solve their problem. They know what it is. The problem is not a problem of skin color. It never has been. But we believe, and many of their own European Americans believe, as Malcolm said when he gave his speech in 1964 at Oxford University on the condition of our people here in America and the type of European Americans, white people, that are of white supremacy or white racist. There's a difference between a white supremacist and a white racist, and you have to understand that. What is that? And those that are of the aristocracy and of the royals. You have to study that history. It has never been about our skin color. It was about who we are as a people. We are the first people on this planet. We were blessed by our Creator to be here, not just thousands, but millions and millions of years ago before these people, and create civilizations to where we are today. And they've expanded on that for themselves. And they taught us, those that were weak enough to hate our color of our hair, or what the texture of our hair or our skin. And those that did not, or they could not subdue, they terrorized and killed them. And they left. You know, it's like separating the wheat from the chaff. So we have a lot of chaff out here, as my mother would say. You separate the wheat from the chaff, and that's exactly what we did. We have a lot of people out here that today that are a lot of chaff. They don't know what they're doing or talking about because they're not in their right mind. I know I've talked to some people, and they praise the fact that European Americans are marching with us, and that they think that's a good thing. How is it a good thing when we can't even march with each other in our own community in peace? And we're killing each other in our own community, in our own homes, in our own schools. What kind of sense does that make? What kind of analogy? Malcolm talked about you have to critically analyze. Critically. Not just helter-skelter and run off and we're going to put some signs together and go downtown somewhere and march. And then you get a few fools who are planted, European Americans who are planted, or those that look like us who are planted in these marches to do the type of things that are happening, burning cars and breaking windows. Why did that not happen, brother? All those years that even before Dr. King, our people, since emancipation, were demonstrating and marching in peace. Who committed the violence? Are you aware of who committed the violence then? I'm asking you, brother.
Oh, yeah, the European Americans.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that goes back, way back even before Emancipation Proclamation. Who was committing the violence upon us? Who was committing the violence on Native Americans? Even Native Americans now are realizing that how they've been terrorized and duped. Here recently, we know of the biggest crime of rape and murder on the reservations of Native American women, and a lot of them are running around thinking it's their own people, and now they know it's European Americans coming on the reservation and kidnapping their women and their children and taking them off the reservation somewhere else. But the reservation police can't go off the reservation and arrest these European Americans for these crimes when they investigate and find out who's committed the crime. They cannot do it, and that should not be. And that applies to us. When crimes are committed on our people, and Malcolm talked about this, very strong in our community. We are derelict in our duty. We have no business out here marching downtown to ask these people for justice in a march. There are books, there are laws. We have all these so-called historically black colleges who were primarily founded and funded by European Americans. For what purpose? But you have these lawyers who look like us and doctors that go to these universities and come out here, and what do? My mother spoke about this a lot. You use their laws. But Malcolm talked about on human rights. Malcolm talked about human rights, your God-given human rights that are recognized in the UN by other white nations. And at the time he was alive, the United States had not signed on. United States government were the founders, contributing founders to the United Nations, but they had not signed on to certain treaties and agreements in the United Nations. And one of those were human rights at that time. So they were in violation of human rights. And so Malcolm talked about, it's not about civil rights. That's what somebody gives you. But recognizing your human rights and sign on to that. You don't have to beg him for anything. And we should not be about that. We can seek justice for ourselves. We don't need to, what happened to Brother Floyd, his family, my condolences to any of these men. But do you realize, brother, how many women, black women, and keep it quiet, that are raped and murdered? Do you realize how many people disappear off the streets? And we think they're in jail, and they've just disappeared. I've seen this as a teenager in my lifetime, where police have kidnapped, taken women off the streets and gone off somewhere and raped them and then dumped them back here in Boston in the South End or Roxbury, and they better not say nothing. That happened in New York. That happened in Philadelphia. It happened in Detroit. But our women, that's how you end up. History shows our women being raped and end up pregnant with these babies. And there are families, whole families, that have gone through that type of terror and trauma. And nobody has done nothing, not even our men. Now, a real man, when you mess up with our women, I know that's the way I was raised. And so wasn't Malcolm and his brothers and his sisters. When you see something, you hear about it now. They tell you, when you see something, say something. Well, with my mother and the rest of this family, you see something, you do something about it. Mm-hmm. Okay? You see a white man accosting a child, a woman, or another man, such as Brother Floyd, and everybody's standing around. That's why a lot of times my mother were in trouble with the police. That's how I was raised. That's how Malcolm was raised. We don't need to ask. You defend that which is ours. But there are those that are not willing to bleed. They want to hope, dream, and pray. There's no blood, sweat, and tears. They're afraid to do that. So as Malcolm would say, don't talk about revolution or change, because change means blood, death. That's what will happen when you want to make a change. It means the risk of your life. One of the things about Patrick Henry talked about liberty or death. He wasn't talking about death of somebody, of himself. he was talking about those who would not give me my liberty, and I have to take it, which may require death. That was what the American Revolution was. Everywhere you turn in America, you see the American flag. Everywhere you turn in the South, you see some Confederate flag. European Americans want to fight their brother and father, that whole Civil War, because they wanted another kind of liberty from their people to do what they wanted to do, their way. And they've done the same thing in Europe. That's their history. That's their legacy. That type of terror. And unfortunately, a lot of our people are into destructive ways. We have been here, as Malcolm said, and lost our minds here. I left our minds in Africa, and we have become so much like them. Everything we do is that of the white philosophy and ideology. You see it every day. They're quoting some Socrates or Freud or Aristotle. We live by his code and ideology and philosophy. Malcolm said, no. We come from a great people. Great people of civilization, the first people, the first ones to create civilization. I don't know if you were aware here in Boston, there was a exhibit from Africa, a Nubian exhibit, which is a Greek word, of here at the MFA, the Museum of Fine Arts here in Boston. It was here for 8 months to a year of our civilization in Africa. One particular ethnic group in Africa, black folks. 4,000 years ago, brother. Before these people even knew how to make bricks or build castles with stone. And that exhibit was here. And I talked to a number of our people here, teachers, that came out of there, and some of them were dumbfounded. They still couldn't believe it. Either they couldn't believe it. Now, I'm not talking European Americans, but these were scholars, professors, teachers, who could not believe they were seeing something of a black woman or a black man 4,000 years ago. Metallurgy, science, technology, math, alphabet, out of Africa. What happened? But here we are today, begging, in her own words, my mother, Brother Malcolm's sister, Ella Collins, who helped raise him even before my parents, Kenneth and Ella, brought Malcolm to Boston. They were supporting Malcolm's siblings because they lost their father, who was assassinated in 1931, was by white folks. And the family was supporting that. And my mother's intention was to bring all her siblings to Boston, to the now historic landmark here in Boston, Roxbury, 72 Dale Street, which is now called the Malcolm X. Ella Collins House. My parents, my father wasn't keen on the idea. He would say to my mother, I married you. I didn't marry your whole family, Ella. I married you. But you, as I said earlier, my mother was about, if you want to be with me, this is what you got to do. What's that song, I think, by J.Lo? Was it J.Lo that wrote that song, Brother Heard, if you want to be with me, what you got to do?
Somebody wrote that, but it sounds just about right. It's like a woman that, is about the business of being about family.
Right. So if you want to be with me, this is what you have to do. And that was my mother. And she had that same issue with her first two husbands. That's why that didn't last long. She divorced them. And the first one was a doctor. He was light brown skin. Now, can you imagine back in the 30s, a black woman, black as the ace of space, divorcing a light brown skinned man who was a doctor, Dr. Lloyd Oxley, because he did not have the courage, Jamaican, he did not have the courage of his conviction. And, hey, if you want to be with me and you can't do what is necessary as a black man in America and coming out of Jamaica, bye.
Oh, yeah. It's interesting. I'm glad you speak about your mom in such glowing terms. Your mom really doesn't get the respect or the acknowledgement that she should. Like I told you, it bothered me that Spike Lee did not include her in that movie that everybody loves so much, the biopic of Malcolm, which is not as accurate as it should be. So, I saw interviews with your mom online. She's very brilliant, insightful, loving. She obviously loved and worshipped Brother Malcolm. She spoke very highly of her brother and did a lot for him. So why is it that she's not better known for her contributions?
Well, first of all, brother, my mother is better known, and she didn't care about being known. As far as she was concerned, being known is what you do. Mm-hmm. In her own words, it's what you do. Just like she said, Malcolm will be known. You will know him. And at that time, she would even know him better. In her own words, if you just those 20 minutes on YouTube, mm-hmm. you would know him better and you would know her better. It's not about Spike Lee. Leave Spike Lee alone. Spike Lee was one of those people that he was hired to do a job to represent what our people who were mindless and did not know who they are, that would believe whatever was put in front of them by someone who had already done some work and in film, and those that felt that he had done a great job, and the powers that be saw that many of those that looked like us praised Spike Lee for his word. That was a marketing tool. My mother had been on that film project that ended up in Spike Lee's hands, that was hired specifically. We were personally involved in that from 1967 up until the time of Spike Lee and Sheikh El-Hajj Malik Al-Shabazz, Malcolm X widow, Dr. Betty Shabazz. She was involved after they couldn't get to my mom. Initially, it was Columbia Pictures, and I wrote about this in my Seventh Child, the book Seventh Child, Family Memoir of Malcolm X, how that went down. It's supposed to be 800 pages, but powers that be that time, they were concerned about being sued because I was giving too much information, and they were concerned about liability. So it ended up being a 250-page memoir, and we're doing more writing on that. But to say to you here now on your program that we had been involved in that so-called, people like to call it Spike Lee film. It's not a Spike Lee film. There was a European-American, I think he was of Canadian background or director that was to be the director. But Marvin Worth and Warner Brothers, when it ended up in their hands, it went from Columbia Pictures, who originally in the 60s, they had talked to my mother, Art RVA and James Baldwin writing the script, and it was to be Sidney Poitier was to be the actor. But they didn't want to deal with my mother properly. And J. Edgar Hoover at the time threatened one of the vice presidents of Columbia Pictures at the time about doing anything that would put up on some high plateau of Malcolm or Dr. King, any black man or woman in America. So they backed out, and it went over to 20th Century Fox hands for a while, and then subsequent with that, it ended up in Warner Brothers and Marvin Worth. If you look at the end of the credits in that so-called Spike Lee film, you will see Marvin Worth. Marvin Worth was the boss, not Spike Lee. Spike Lee is the mouth. Spike Lee is the mouth. Okay, that's all he was. And even his producing work, his name is there as a producer. And yes, he did some directing, but there were issues. There was issues he had with the Saudis in Saudi Arabia that as last I knew, have not been resolved. It may have been. I don't want to misspeak presently, but at that time when that film was released, there was issues with the Saudi Arabian government on the film and production of Malcolm X film, and the issue of Mecca and the Kaaba and how that was done and what was promised. But these people who were behind and putting Spike Lee out front, they knew what they were doing. And the money they put behind it and the people they got behind it, it worked. They spent a little money. Having Denzel Washington wasn't something that happened by accident just because he was a great actor. My mother had picked Denzel Washington when he was in drama school in New York, and there was an individual that had done a play on Malcolm, and he had was in that play, and the director of that play, you can research the school that Denzel went to, asked my mother to come down, that he had a young man that they thought that had a future and possibility, and we have him playing Malcolm X. So my mother approved of him then, and later she wasn't against Sidney Poitier because he was known and she liked Sidney Poitier, but she liked the fact that here you had a young black man at that time that was very young and played Malcolm. And so even coming forward to today, the movie that Disney is doing in partnership with others, and the actor Nigel Tish, when we finally selected Nigel to play Malcolm in this movie series that's done with Disney, I and Professor James Smalls, who is a consultant with Disney on the film, and who is on our foundation's board of directors, the Malcolm X. A.L.L. Collins Family Foundation, we looked at the actors that were selected to play the part of Malcolm. I think it was 4 to 6 different actors at the time. But considering Professor Smalls and I, Professor James Smalls and myself, considering the history, and this is what our young people need to do today, you have to know the history of something. You have to critically analyze what has happened in our history and the past. And that's what I looked at, what my mother had gone through with the movie industry at the time that wanted to do a movie on Malcolm, but she would not go along with the jive that they were putting down, which was to give what you see today. You see 2 different Malcolms that that's not Malcolm X. The narrative, to create another narrative. The narrative being, well, Malcolm, when he went to Mecca, he changed. When he come back, he loving all white folks like he was Daniel on the road to Damascus, and he had an enlightenment all of a sudden. That's not true. Malcolm had gone to Mecca previously. There were European and Mideast and Asian and African Muslims here in America, going way back. And so we know there were Arab Muslims, white Muslims, all kinds. It was not something Malcolm didn't know. He had been to Mecca on Umrah tour in the late 50s, 1959. But that's the narrative that those in media, in institutions, and who have an agenda to portray a black man, he's all forgiving to white folks for their crimes against humanity. How can you forgive anyone who have, or any people who have a history of more than 2,000 years of committing terror across the globe? How can you forgive them for their terror, even to their own people, and you just march? It's an insult. It's an insult. It's an insult, brother, even to their own people. If you study the European history and the violence and the terror and the evil and the genocide that they've committed, long before 1940s or 30s, that they have been committing on the people. I don't think I know a lot of our people do not know. You need to read about the African Holocaust. I don't remember the writer, but the African Holocaust that had taken place before the white Holocaust of Europe under the Nazi regime, that the Kaiser and the aristocracy of Europe, when they brought in Hitler to do their dirty work, and Hitler then brought in Heinrich Himmler and Goering. Heinrich Himmler and Goering's, both their parents, the fathers, were already committing genocide of the same that they were doing in Europe on black people. They had already experimented in cutting off the arms and doing all kind of medical experiments on black people in Southwest Africa, present-day Namibia. Read about the African Holocaust. Google it and get the book, The African Holocaust that was committed in Southwest Africa. And this genocide on our people is nothing new. It's nothing new. It's been practiced for a very long time on our people in Africa, Asia, South America, and on Europeans themselves. And they're doing it today. But they can't get away with it in Europe as easy as they used to, because you have somebody like those in Eastern Europe, somebody like a Putin, or those before him that they could not control. They're not going to have that anymore. You're not going to practice your colonialism or capitalism or your exploitation of us and not share the wealth, because the wealth of Western Europe was not shared with the East European. And I can tell you, having studied and gone to university in Bergen University in Norway, and have studied these Europeans as I was asked to do by my mother, understand the nature of a thing. As Malcolm talked about, understand the nature of these people. If you do not understand the nature of these European Americans and these Europeans, critically analyze. This is what Brother Hurd, our people are not doing here today. It's happening, don't get me wrong, and it's happening, but not just here, it's happening around the world. They're waking up today. As Malcolm said, there will come a time will tell, when you have young people. This is just the start. This is just, in the eyes of the Creator, 1,000,000 years is like a wink. This is just a wink, brother. It's only a wink. But when our people and others realize what has happened to them, how they've been duped, how these young people, European Americans, have been duped by whom? The same people that duped us, aristocracy and the people of power, who goes way back. They're not about your skin color. They don't care about that. It's about your power, who you are as a people, where you come from, the first people, what you represent. You're a threat to them. You're a threat to their existence because they know who you are. And for us to run around here about Black Lives Matter, if you don't realize that your Black Lives Matter to you, it's up to them to figure that out. Let them put up their Black Lives Matter in their churches and their towns and their steeples and their organizations as they should do. As they should do.
So, Brother Rodnell, I want to ask you, so much stuff you just put out there. I mean, like, putting out all this information. I want to just backtrack a little bit. Is it true that your mom, Ella, funded a lot of Malcolm's trips to Mecca and other places overseas?
Everything she funded, brother. Uncle Malcolm didn't have no income. Well, the other brothers, his brothers, Uncle Philbert was a salesman, furniture salesman, and insurance salesman. Uncle Wilfred was a business administrator in human resources for Michigan Bell, which later became Verizon, and he was with the chairman of the board of Michigan Bell at the time as an advisor. All the family members had jobs as they were teaching in the nation and out, but Uncle Malcolm's job was a full-time job. He was a field marshal. He was a drum major, as they would say, for the cause. Okay, he was out in the field, on the ground, always 24/7. Uncle Malcolm didn't have any money. What stipend he got out of headquarters, and he was going around the nation and setting up, when he was in the Nation of Islam, and setting up these temples and mosques. The nation didn't have any money, brother. You go back and check your records. Look at, just check your history, do some research. The Nation of Islam before Malcolm even was my Uncle Wilfred, Uncle Filbert, Uncle Wesley, and Uncle Reginald. When Elijah Muhammad was in prison, the government had arrested him under some fake, trumped up, whatever they could get to stop a black man from telling the truth and talking about the truth. But it was his wife and Minister Elijah Muhammad's brothers and his wife, primarily Sister Clara, who kept it going while Elijah Muhammad was in prison. But his illness, Elijah Muhammad's illness, affected the organization. They only had a few people at the time. As my Uncle Wilfred had talked about in ABC broadcasts, where the Nation of Islam, and I think the ABC broadcast that was done, also in the movie documentary for PBS, Malcolm X, Make It Plain. Malcolm X, Make It Plain. You can get that, go online, and there's a picture book on the movie Malcolm X, Make It Plain, and you can read some of the quotes and comments by members of, Malcolm's siblings, Uncle Wilfred, Uncle Filbert, my mother, and myself. But the thing is, the nation only had a few people. And when my mother's siblings became part of that nation with Mr. Muhammad, who Mr. Muhammad's family was related to us down south on the side of Malcolm's father's side, distantly, but that was kept secret, it was kept quiet. Even the federal government didn't know it at the time. That was kept quiet. And that was the main reason why Malcolm's family joined after the Garvey movement fell apart, for the same reason, with the federal government destroying anything that has to do in America about uplifting our people mentally. They always find a weak link if you allow it to. But, there are other links too. And how you make the connection. Make those connections, as Oprah used to like to say, I think, make the connection. And Malcolm's siblings made the connection. They transitioned from the Marcus Garvey movement over to Mr. Muhammad's movement, philosophy, and ideology at the time, which was unorthodox, Ahmadiyya Islam. But then you have to understand, why did they become a part of Mr. Muhammad's movement? Not only because the energy and time the family had put in the Marcus Garvey movement, and prior to the Marcus Garvey movement, many of Malcolm's families, what was kept out of and what Malcolm didn't talk about, and other family members, they were Masons. Malcolm's father was a Mason. His grandfather, his mother, whole line of them Masons and Eastern Stars in the South. Now, you have to understand that I'm talking about Prince Hall Masons. How far does that go back? And then you go back to before they were Masons, they were Muslims in Africa. There were many that were Christian, but on Malcolm's side, many were Muslims. There were some even Hebrew in slavery. But how do you keep that how do you keep that heritage and that legacy? Fortunately for us, Malcolm stood on shoulders of his ancestors, my brother. That's what he stood on. Malcolm didn't just pop out like some of our young people think today. You can just all of a sudden be who you are. Even President Clinton tell you that. the Europeans tell you that every day when they talk about their great wonders that they've done, their great white civilization. And it's true. It is great. It is great for them considering the barbaric culture that they came out of. I just told you about the civilization thousands of years ago. It goes beyond 10. It's 200,000. They know our civilization goes back millions of years, and it is documented, and it's documented, my brother. It's documented. They have the documentation. So when you hear European Americans talk about how great they are great for their people, but we are a billion times greater if you want to talk about and put some material philosophy or ideology on it. So don't waste your time, as my mother said, with that. Don't waste your time out here trying to talk about your freedom. You've been free for millions of years. You're the first people. You're the creators of civilization. So who can best be about freedom than us? And you're running around here acting like you know what you're talking about. These young people don't know, and the people that they are associated with that are manipulating them, and they don't even know it. That look like us. Yes.
Yeah, I got to ask you, because I mean, you got so much, you say so much, you know, like when I talk to you, you got so much information. And like, I think people have to re-listen to a lot of things you're saying because you're giving so much. And I just want to track back a little bit to the Malcolm X biopic thing with Marvin Worth. My understanding from what I read is that Sister Betty sold his life story rights to Marvin Worth for like $100,000.
No.
Has made so much money.
No. Sister Betty, Dr. Betty Shabazz, Aunt Betty, as again in my mother's own words, Aunt Betty, you know, you have to understand, my brother. Here's a black woman, a beautiful black woman in America, married to Malcolm X, which is a challenge. Believe me, the sister, she was 22 years old. Beautiful sister, just coming out of college, learning, and this is one of the things Uncle Malcolm admired about Aunt Betty. Black woman, black, beautiful. Uncle Malcolm, many times they were lighter. Listen, Uncle Malcolm was afraid of marrying a light-skinned woman and having light-skinned children, and then out here walking around like you're somebody because you're that color thing that my mother spoke about, that our people and European Americans exploit you on that to make you think you're somebody more special. I mean, they use that divide and conquer all over the world, even amongst their own people. You're blonde and blue-eyed. You're better than the dark brown, dark-eyed one. That jive, they put that on their own people. So Malcolm was deeply concerned about that because he saw that in families, in African-American families, and in our history. So he was a minister, not administering Elijah Muhammad's philosophy and interpretation of Islam, but he was also, Malcolm X married people. He married men and women, couples. That's what he did. I did not understand it at the time. I didn't, from what I knew, I never heard Uncle Malcolm went to divinity school. But I was a young child. I was a teenager. I didn't know that you could get a license in a state, such as here in Massachusetts. My son, he doesn't have a divinity, he never went to divinity school, but here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, as in many other states, you can get a license to perform weddings. And so Uncle Malcolm did that. He performed weddings for those in the Nation of Islam that he approved of. He lived as he preached, is what I'm saying here to you, Brother Hurd. And that's how he chose his wife. He would choose and approve of a man marrying a woman and a woman marrying a man if he was going to administer that marriage. He would research them out for the prospective wife, if this is a good husband, and for the brother and his family, if this is a good wife for you, and you're going to be part of the nation, because we're about nation time, building a nation here in America so we can go forth. So part of that was Malcolm being a minister of marrying people, and he did study and get a certificate at Boston University when he was incarcerated under these people here in Massachusetts. He studied divinity and had there was a divinity school in the prison. You don't hear anything about that. You only hear about he was debating. But while he was debating, he was even preaching then from the pulpit. It wasn't just debating. And he was preaching to everyone, black, brown, green, red, or yellow, that would listen. And so he was ministering to the flock while he was in prison and received a certificate while he was in prison from Boston University Divinity School. They don't tell you that. So when Malcolm was out here, and answer to your question, and choosing a wife such as Sister Betty, he wasn't choosing her just because she was beautiful and black, but her mind, he needed a wife that would raise his children and be a husband and deal with him. It's not easy, as I said, being the wife of Malcolm X, and they didn't grow on trees at the time. My mother had someone in mind for him, two someones, but they were lighter skinned. One of them we knew very well, and another was an Egyptian sister that we knew through someone else, a sister Zuad Muhammad, who helped my mother open up the Surrey little preparatory school here in the south end of Boston that is in the documentary Malcolm X Make It Plain. But no, Uncle Malcolm had told my mother, no, we already have enough problems, Ella, in America with this color thing amongst our people. I want a woman that will understand our problem and our plight in America. That was primary and foremost. So, and as he says himself, out of his own words, in his book, I guess I love my wife, Sister Betty, at the time. He didn't marry for love. He married for womanhood, black womanhood. That's what he married for. And that itself, you have to love black womanhood and understand that. And that's when he married Sister Betty. Now, Sister Betty didn't fully understand all that. She was 22 years old. She was some parents that had adopted her out of the South, and come to find out years later, after my uncle's assassination, she's related to us too. She's a distant cousin on another side of the family from down south. So she's like fifth or sixth cousin, and we didn't know that at the time. But it was a beautiful thing. But Uncle Malcolm didn't know it. My mother didn't know it. I didn't know it. Nobody knew until my mother and I, when she was alive, we were doing some deep research going back. So when Aunt Betty is left alone back at the time that my mother was involved with this film, they couldn't get to my mother. They got to Sister Betty, because the lawyer that she had, Percy Sutton, who had his own issues then, and as we know later, there were issues. He had issues then, and we were not. When my uncle was alive, he served a purpose, and my uncle was satisfied with that. But my uncle was assassinated, and Percy Sutton didn't perform his duties satisfactorily to what my mother felt after her brother's assassination, and the widow of her brother's. You know, she was not comfortable. There were issues. Percy Sutton was playing it. He was playing the family, and that being on Sister Betty's weakness. And my mom, there were issues. Families have issues, and when a woman that is pregnant with a man that she has 6 children with, and 2 in your belly, and it wasn't long before he was assassinated, found out about that, and then 1 on your arm, it's still in diapers that you're breastfeeding, and then 3 on your coattail, and young. And now that she didn't know which way to turn, because her family was not organized. They were coming out of the South trying to get their act together. They weren't in the nation. So Aunt Betty was out here. She had been now with a real man, her husband. and all these babies. And so she was traumatized. The sister we were so afraid, my mother and I, and a couple of other members of our immediate family that were with us and helped supported Uncle Malcolm and helped my mother pay for his funeral. We didn't have to raise money. That was a media jive that Percy was putting out, Percy Sutton. That was jive talk. My mother, they had insurance on Malcolm way back, plus whenever he needed money, she gave it to him. She financed everything. But Sister Betty, being not wanting to listen to anyone of her own mind, that being my mother, who had proven herself in business, had proven herself with her family, her brothers, her siblings, and listening to other people whispering in her ears, such as Percy Sutton, you're a woman, you're a widow, this, all this. I mean, these people play on these widows. They play on Mrs. King. They preyed on Mrs. King, excuse me. They preyed on Mrs. King. They preyed on Mrs. Kennedy and any weaknesses that these widows of these assassinated men, they've been traumatized just losing their men and these children that they have. People have to understand that. I've seen that. I've been around that. I've been around the Kennedys. We knew about them way back in the 50s, and as my mother said, how Mrs. Kennedy was raising her sons. There was a connection there that goes way back, but that's something that the public will know about later. These three men had crossed paths here in Massachusetts, very close, right here in Roxbury. So, and then here are these women who are having these babies and carrying these children and the trauma. And when you see that, my brother, and then think and see that how our women around here in this nation, around the world, I've seen it, I've felt it, I've touched it. It traumatized me, okay? So I had an attitude. You come near my cousins or my aunt, you got to deal with me. I don't need nobody. I don't need no army, no. You're going to deal, and I'm not coming to talk to you. And that's the way my mother and I functioned. When we were taking him to bury him, my mother and I knew when we were alone. We didn't depend on anybody else, whatever security, whatever National Guard. We depended on us. And so my mother had her pistol, her hand grenade, and whatever money she needed in that big bag she carried. In that car, we were alone and with the boss agents. We were concerned about Betty losing those babies and being already traumatized and giving premature birth. So she and people talking into her ear, such as Sutton and the others, that and the ex-wife of actor Sidney Poitier, and all this celebrity stuff and people in her head and her soror sisters and all this business, and not paying any attention to an established family who have suffered as well, but who have a proven track record. She didn't want to listen to that. And particularly my mother. And my mother's a very strong person. She did not, Aunt Betty did not want President Kwame Nkrumah's offer to go to Africa and teach at the university. That was offered, University of Ghana in Africa after independence was offered. It was offered to Uncle Malcolm a professorship there, full professorship with a home, and the children would be safe there and living in Ghana. King Faisal offered full support. Come, Brother Malcolm, El-Hajj Malik Shabazz, to be here and help us to understand what is happening in America with Islam in America and what you're about. So that was offered to Malcolm, carte blanche, my brother, for her and Malcolm to be there. So we're turning all this down, and someone talking to them, she, at a weak moment, she sold the lifetime rights I believe it was 50. It wasn't 100,000. It was in Jet Magazine or Ebony for $50,000 to $75,000. Research it. To the lifetime image and rights of Malcolm to Time Warner, and Time Warner had Marvin Worth, and Time Warner and Marvin Worth shared that. I believe the Marvin Worth estate, I think it's 50-50 or 49-50. So Marvin Worth's estate on a film that grossed worldwide as of 10 years ago, $1.5 billion, and none of Malcolm's estate receives any benefit from that.
Wow.
Okay, none whatsoever. None whatsoever. Not her before she passed away, because that was her. And my mother had warned her about that. She had been warned and told her not to, how to go about doing this. And as my mother said in her own words, she was over her own mind and didn't want to listen. And I had issues with my mom and my Uncle Wilford and Filbert and Wesley and Reginald, Aunt Bonnie, Aunt Hilda, Malcolm's third oldest sister. Aunt Hilda lived with Aunt Betty for 5 years to help Aunt Betty raise those children. Oh. And she could not do it any longer because Aunt Betty did not want to listen. So Aunt Hilda left Aunt Betty's home in helping raise those children, but she did have those 5 years with her nieces to help them. And Aunt Betty, again, people are talking to her now. She is, going for her doctorate and all this, and other people talking into her head and what you could do and what you shouldn't do. And meantime, had nothing whatsoever about Malcolm's family, legacy, and struggle, and talking to her about that and standing by that. She went her own way. And, people say, well, she's a grown woman, but, our folks often talk about what you should, coulda, shoulda, woulda. And you look at anything of power in this nation or in Europe, and who is running and who are the people of power. They have a fist. They're not divided. A family divided cannot stand. So is it for a nation. And when you have someone that will divide and separate themselves from a family that has a track record, then that you're out there winging it. You're winging it, and Aunt Betty was winging it. So that's how that goes.
Hey, everybody, this is Brother Ron. I am asking you all to do me a big favor. Think about supporting the We All Be movement. Your donation is tax deductible. The We All Be Group Incorporated is a recognized 501c3. And I'm just asking you all because I want to keep on bringing y'all quality work through the way that I know how to do best. And I'm going to sing my praises and toot my horn. A lot of y'all were not hip to Dick Gregory until Brother Ron brought him on the We All Be platform, until that jingle review we did. Y'all seen another side of Judge Joe Brown, and Judge Joe Brown's message has been amplified. But it was We All Be that brought Judge Joe Brown to y'all back in 2014. And so many others. And we covered so many things. So help us out so we can help you all. Peace.